November 8, 1942. North Africa. Before sunrise, the quiet shoreline near Casablanca, Oran, and Algiers began to tremble under the sound of engines. For the first time in this war, the United States was about to launch a major offensive on the ground against Axis forces. The mission had a clear purpose: open a new front, relieve pressure on the Soviet Union, and create a path into southern Europe. But behind the official goals stood a far more complex reality: political tension, unpredictable allies, and commanders trying to prove that American forces could fight a global war. For weeks, Generals Dwight Eisenhower and Mark Clark had struggled to assemble an operation unlike anything the U.S. had attempted before. More than 100,000 American and British troops had to cross the Atlantic, avoid German submarines, land simultaneously at 3 different points, and then convince, or force, the Vichy French defenders to stand down. Nothing about it was guaranteed. Washington hoped the French would switch sides. London doubted it. And the men boarding the landing craft knew only one thing: they were heading into the unknown. The soldiers who approached the beaches of North Africa that morning were mostly inexperienced. Many had never left the United States until weeks earlier. They had drilled for amphibious landings on American shores, repeating the same movements until their muscles reacted faster than their doubts. But real war was different. The glow of tracer fire, the crack of coastal guns, and the fear of a first battle, these were things no training ground could simulate. Yet Operation Torch was not just a military challenge, it was a test of trust. The US and Britain still disagreed on strategy. The Soviets were demanding immediate action in the West. President Roosevelt needed a victory to show that American involvement mattered. The world waited to see whether the United States could coordinate a complex coalition assault, or whether the operation would dissolve into chaos before it even began. As the first landing waves approached the shore near Casablanca, the plan was already starting to show cracks. Navigation errors pushed some landing craft miles off course. Communications between ships were spotty. Units that were supposed to land together became separated in the dark. And the French defenders, far from simply stepping aside, began firing warning shots that quickly turned into real combat. Every soldier on those boats now understood. Torch wasn't going to be a symbolic entry into the war. It was going to be a fight. In the hours that followed, American commanders faced a dilemma. They wanted to avoid unnecessary bloodshed with the French, but they also needed to secure the beaches before German reinforcements could arrive. Hesitation could ruin everything. Eisenhower sent urgent messages to French officers, hoping diplomacy would work faster than artillery. At the same time, destroyers offshore prepared to strike French positions if negotiations failed. The entire operation balanced on a thin line between alliance and conflict. By mid-morning, chaos and momentum collided. Some French units began to soften their resistance, unsure whether to fight or cooperate. Others continued to push back with determination, convinced that surrendering meant betraying their government. American troops pushed inland in fragmented groups, clearing obstacles, capturing small forts, and trying to link up with units that had landed in the wrong places. Operations that looked precise on paper became a series of small, intense engagements scattered across the coastline. And yet, beneath the confusion, something crucial was taking shape. The Americans were gaining ground. They were adapting to real combat. Officers made quick decisions that kept battalions moving forward instead of stalling on the beaches. The landings had not been perfect, far from it, but they were holding. The United States, still new to the global battlefield, was proving that it could execute a massive amphibious operation under pressure. As the sun climbed higher over the Atlantic, signals from across the 3 landing zones carried mixed news: setbacks, breakthroughs, moments of near disaster, and flashes of hope. Torch was only hours old, but already it was clear. This operation would shape the path of the entire war, and the hardest decisions, the ones that would decide its outcome, were still ahead. November 8, 1942. Atlantic Ocean. As the first rays of sunrise touched the horizon, American soldiers were already standing on the decks, staring toward the distant outline of North Africa. None of them had ever fought the German army before. None of them knew how the day would unfold, but every one of them understood. This was the moment the United States truly entered the war against Hitler. The invasion force was split into 3 massive groups. In the west, General Patton's troops heading for Morocco. In the center, Lloyd Fredendall's forces moving toward Oran. In the east, the landing force assigned to seize Algiers and open the road to Tunisia. The Allies hoped the Vichy French wouldn't fight for Germany, but American commanders knew hope wasn't a plan. And as the first landing craft approached the shore, the truth became clear. Resistance was unavoidable. Near Casablanca, French coastal batteries opened fire on the approaching American ships. The Americans responded with shells from the battleship USS Massachusetts, the first combat engagement in the ship's history. The sea shook with explosions. Patton's men began landing under fire, trying to secure beaches where everything seemed to detonate at once. The situation in Algiers was different. Here, the Allies counted on local underground officers who opposed the Vichy regime. During the night before the operation, they attempted to seize key positions, but their numbers were too small. And at dawn, when American ships appeared offshore, the battle had already begun. French sailors opened fire. American sailors fired back. A thick curtain of smoke rose over Algiers as landing craft pushed forward. But the closer the Americans came, the clearer it became that the resistance wasn't fanatical. Many Vichy soldiers hesitated, unsure whether to die for a government that was collapsing by the day. That was just the first hour. The first day would be far harder. By noon, the Americans had landed thousands of troops at all three beachheads. But a new problem emerged. German reconnaissance aircraft had already spotted the invasion. And in Berlin, commanders understood exactly what the Allies were trying to do: break through to Tunisia, where remnants of Rommel's forces were still holding on. If the US and Britain reached Tunisia first, North Africa would be lost. Hitler ordered aircraft, tanks, and infantry to be rushed into Tunisia as fast as possible. Speed would decide everything. The Germans wanted the door shut before the Allies even got off the beaches. At the same time, American forces ran into difficulties that would follow them for months. Most soldiers had never taken part in an amphibious landing. Navigation equipment malfunctioned, units became confused, and some companies landed nearly a mile from their assigned beaches. Yet despite the chaos, the Americans pushed forward, because they knew losing momentum could make Tunisia unreachable. By the evening of November 8th, negotiations with the French began. Vichy generals were divided. Some argued for continued resistance. Others understood the war had moved far beyond their control. Throughout the night, in Algiers and Oran, gunfire faded and flared again. But slowly, step by step, the Americans gained the upper hand. Meanwhile, Germany came to a different realization. The United States hadn't just landed, it had landed in force, confidently and with coordination. For Hitler, it was an alarming sign. He had assumed the Green American Army would be too inexperienced to conduct large-scale operations. But reality was proving different. The landings were harder than the Allies expected, but they were successful. Night of November 9th, 1942. American soldiers, exhausted and soaked, dug into their new positions. Some had heard artillery for the first time in their lives. Some had already lost friends, but all of them understood one thing clearly: they had taken the first real step. No one yet knew how difficult the push toward Tunisia would be. No one knew they would soon face the best units the Wehrmacht could deploy. No one imagined how many mistakes they would make, or how many lessons they would learn. But the landing had already changed the war. The United States was now on the continent. The road to Europe was open, and Hitler saw, for the first time, that he had underestimated a new enemy, one that had come to stay. November 9th, 1942. North Africa. As the first battles for Algiers and Oran began to subside, American commanders realized the operation had entered a far more dangerous second phase. Now it wasn't just about who won the beaches, it was about who would reach Tunisia first. There lay the only gateway through which Germany could still hold North Africa. If the Allies closed it, the campaign would be won. If the Germans reached it first, the real fight would begin. The United States and Britain pushed forward their mobile units. Columns of trucks, reconnaissance battalions, and light tanks moved eastward. But the terrain offered no forgiveness. Bad maps, mountains, narrow winding roads, mud that swallowed vehicles. A continent the American army was seeing for the first time. As the Allies pushed ahead, Germany did what it always did best: reacted quickly. Through Sicily, the first Wehrmacht units began arriving in Tunisia: paratroopers, elements of the Hermann Göring Division, motorized infantry battalions. Luftwaffe aircraft crossed the Mediterranean and immediately struck Allied columns. Tunisia became a race course. Every day was decisive. November 10th to 15th. The Americans seized Bizerte. The British advanced toward Tunisia from the north. But on the horizon, German tanks appeared. The first clashes revealed the truth. The Allies were not facing Vichy French troops or scattered garrisons, but a trained, organized, battle-hardened German army. By late November, the Germans had fortified key positions. Tunisia became a heavily defended area. Here the United States faced a lesson that would shape its approach for years. Enemy inexperience did not matter. War demanded discipline, precise planning, and the ability to adapt. The first major battles within the country began. The Allies realized victory would not come easily. The Wehrmacht fought as though it intended to turn the tide of the war right here. Winter 1942-43 brought trials the Americans had never known. Lack of coordination between British and American forces, differing command approaches, challenging terrain where tanks could move only along narrow paths, constant attacks from the German Air Force. But the ultimate test came in February, a place whose name would become symbolic, Kasserine Pass. Here Wehrmacht and Afrika Korps units struck, pushing American forces back. This was the first major defeat for the U.S. Army in the campaign. It was not catastrophic, but it was painful. It showed that American soldiers were brave, but their staffs inexperienced. That the new divisions were motivated, but needed time to learn how to fight such an enemy. This defeat would change the entire American approach to the war. After Kasserine, command structures were reorganized, communication systems rebuilt, tactics revised. Troops retrained directly in field conditions. The results were immediate. By spring 1943, the United States and Britain launched a decisive offensive. Slowly but steadily, they advanced toward Tunisia. Each day of movement tightened the noose. German supply lines faltered. Allied ships intercepted transports and aircraft struck ports. Axis forces found themselves trapped, exactly in the position the Allies had begun creating on November 8th, the day of the landings. May 13th, 1943. Tunisia fell. 250,000 German and Italian soldiers surrendered to the Allies. It was one of the largest German capitulations of the war, comparable to Stalingrad in terms of prisoners. For the United States, this victory meant far more than the liberation of Africa. It proved the American army could learn. It could adapt strategy. It could make mistakes and grow stronger from them. Operation Torch taught the Allies one key lesson. America had not just arrived in Europe. America had arrived to fight, not just observe. And now Germany faced an enemy that would only grow stronger with each passing month. Next came Sicily, then Italy, and later Normandy. But it all began here, in November 1942, when American soldiers first set foot on African soil and proved that the war had entered a new, inevitable phase. Torch was the beginning of the end, and its memory stands as a reminder of how the United States first confronted the Wehrmacht, made early mistakes, endured defeats, and yet won a campaign that would change the course of World War II.